so let's make a start. Welcome everyone to the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. My name is Ian Gadd. I am, as is often the case when I stand at the front here, I'm wearing many hats. I am chair of the board here at the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. I am with Betty Suchar, the co-convener for Literature and Humanities. I am a professor of English literature at Bath University and a former employee, or what's the opposite of being line managed? This was my boss for 20 years. So you'll notice, those of you who know me very well will notice a deference coming that you don't normally see. This lecture is one of about 30 or so, 36 talks that Brilsey has organised to explore the history, legacy and the future relevance of the Renaissance. Renaissance Journeys of Discovery propels us through a pivotal age that spans 3 centuries, depending on where you are in Europe, across diverse cultural disciplines and several continents. And tonight's talk has Renaissance very much in its title, but it will be much more than simply an exploration of what it meant to be alive in the Renaissance period. It will be an exploration of the extraordinary history and culture of the City of London. It gives me enormous pleasure to welcome tonight's speaker, Professor Tracey Hill, Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, Professor Emerita at Bath University, author of multiple books, including this one, which is a history of the Lord Mayor's Show. Any of you who've been in London in November will have seen that. They also continue to broadcast that live. This weekend. As well as a number of journal articles and book chapters. She is editor-in-chief of the records of the early English drama collection, Civic London 1558 to 1642. More importantly, she is a Freeman of the City of London and a liveryman of the Worshipful company of founders. I am afraid I'm a mere yeoman of the Stationers' Company. So for many reasons, as I said, I defer to Tracey. And just to complete that, without Tracey, I wouldn't be here in Bath. Tracey, yes, Tracey was on my interviewing panel and was my line manager for almost 2 decades, I think. So I'm delighted to welcome Tracey here for this evening's talk, and you will have an exceptional time, I'm sure. I know there will be some music which will be played via her iPad, so those of you online, it may be a slightly less quality kind of bit of audio there, but we will do our best. So, Tracey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I should say from the outset, I'm just at the tail end of an extremely nasty virus, so if I start coughing or wheezing, then please bear with me, but I will do my very best to get through it, and the microphone will help a great deal. Also, I've got 40 slides, so hilarious. Okay, so my title, I've taken the kind of usual academic liberty of messing around with the grammar, so we've got celebrating brackets in Renaissance London, because what I want to do is to try and take you back in time. So to think not just how, for us, 400 years later, we look back and see these entertainments, but how they were experienced by Londoners in the 16th and 17th centuries. So I'm trying to kind of conjure up the experience, if you like, as much as I possibly can. No time machine, unfortunately, is available. I wish it was, but it's not. So, okay, I will whiz through some of them because I've got a lot, as I say. This, just for clarity, because these are terms I'm going to be using quite a lot. Yeah, again, I'm not tall, thank you. When I say livery companies, I mean the companies of the City of London, and I don't mean anything else but the City of London, when I say London, by the way. So from, the Mercer's Company, the #1 company, right down to the Stationers' Company. And my own, the founders, we're 30-something, 33, I think. So they are the historic companies, and of which there are about 80 in this period, and they were absolutely central to the economic and cultural life of the City of London in the period. So they're really, really important. So I'll be referring to them a lot, pretty much all the time. Um, in terms of the actual events I'm going to be looking at, what we now know of is the Lord Mayor's Show, which is usually in this period called Triumph, or just the day when the Lord Mayor took his oath at Westminster, which is not very catchy, really. The terms pageant usually refers to as an individual discrete device, a little stage of some kind. Then there's this Midsummer Watch, and then there's the Royal Entry. So those are the three main categories of civic entertainments in the period. The Royal Entry, by the way, is not just coronations of monarchs. It also includes things like visits from members of the family, of the royal family. My final slide is actually about the visit of the Queen Mother, which was Marie de Medici, Charles I's mother-in-law, in the 1630s, but it also includes things like the installation of the Prince of Wales and the royal marriage of Elizabeth and the Elector Palatine in 1613. So there's quite a lot of that kind of stuff going on, but it's sporadic. Obviously, by definition, there's not a new monarch every year, but there's a new Lord Mayor every year. The Midsummer Watch was incredibly important kind of civic entertainment through the most of the 16th century. There was a bit of a revival of it, which I'll be showing you some slides about in a moment. But by the time you get to the end of the 16th century, it had pretty much died away. But by then, the Lord Mayor's Show had completely eclipsed it anyway. So that's a very big one. Most of my talk is going to be about the Lord Mayor's Show, because there's so much more to say. I could probably talk about any one of these slides would fit 40 minutes, so I will try not to overrun too much. But what I want to do is start off with dear old John Stowe and the Survey of London, just to emphasize the antiquity of these entertainments. Stowe himself says, of triumphant shows made by citizens of London, you may read in the year 1236, the 20th of Henry III, Eleanor, the daughter of Raymond, Earl of Provence, riding through the city towards Westminster to be crowned Queen of England. The city was adorned with silks, and in the night with lamps, cressets, and other lights without number. Also many pageants and strange devices. Citizens also rode to meet the king and queen, clothed in long garments embroidered about with gold and silks of diverse colours, their horses gallantry trapped to the number of 360, every man bearing a cup of gold or silver in his hand, and the king's trumpeters standing before them. So we've got all the elements there that I'm going to be expanding on as we go through. We've got the citizens of London coming together to stage an entertainment. You've got the processional quality of it, going from one place to another. You've got light, music, colour, costumes, horses. So these are all kind of features that you'll see again and again in different incarnations in the period. So, okay, I'll start off, as I say, with the Midsummer Watch. This is my terrible map. This is what's usually called the Agas map, which was originally done in 1561, and when was redone in the 1630s. But it's one of the definitive maps of early modern London. I love it to bits, like everybody does, really. But what I've done there is rather clumsily tried to show you on the map where the route of the Midsummer Watch went. It starts at St Paul's, goes all the way along Cheapside, up Cornhill to Aldgate, down Fenchurch Street, up Gracious Street, back onto Cornhill, and back onto Cheap. So it's got a kind of, not a circular route, but it goes back on itself. These routes vary. By the way, all three types of entertainment I'm talking about have got different routes, and they all signify different things. So I'll say more about them when we get to them. But the route of the Midsummer Watch is primarily oriented around the major thoroughfares of the city, and it's intended to demonstrate the city's kind of strength and self-importance. And here's Stowe talking about the route as well. But he also gives you a bit of colour as well. On the visual of St John Baptist, there's the night before the feast of St John Baptist, and St Peter and St Paul the Apostles, every man's door being shadowed with green birch, long fennel, St John's wort, orpin, not sure what orpin is, white lilies, and such like, garnished upon with garlands of beautiful flowers, lamps of glass, oil burning in them all the night, hung out branches of iron, curiously wrought, containing hundreds of lamps lighted at once, made a goodly show, and all the way through the route. Then you've got two elements to the Midsummer Watch. There's the standing watch, which is like a kind of curfew type thing, really, and then the marching watch, which is the processional, more ceremonial one. And there's the route. He also goes on to say, and there's a little bit I'll show you in a minute, what people actually carried with them. People in the procession had cressets. These are cressets. So they're iron torches, basically, and they hold light. And the cresset light is kind of sort of an oil, and they would have had somebody with them carrying the light for when the crest needed topping up, basically. So you've got a certain number of people being asked to kind of process around with these cressets, someone else helping them out, and everyone has a straw hat, which I always find deeply amusing. Actually, it must have been very embarrassing. And they had badges on them, and the badges were actually painted with the coat of arms that the person was a member of. It's almost 2,000, it says. So it's quite a big thing. You know, given the population of London in this period is probably about 250,000. So that's quite a chunk of people, really. How did this all come about? Well, what happened is that this happens all the time, really. The City of London, the Lord Mayor and the Court of Aldermen basically instruct the livery companies what they have to do. They usually know, because this happens all the time, but they still get told every single time. So I spend a lot of time reading these precepts. A precept is basically an instruction. It's like a directive, if you like. This one is from 1568, as you can see, from the Merchant Tailors Company. They're all the same. So a clerk would have, might have done something wrong now. Oh, sorry. The city clerk would have just basically addressed them to each of the companies, and then, you know, some young lad would have been given tuppence to go around and deliver them or something like that. You can still see them sometimes with their sort of original envelope shape, where they've been folded up and tucked away, which is really amazing, actually. But this is a precept: address the merchant tailors, where they are told with all convenient expedition and speed to provide and prepare in a perfect readiness 16 fair and comely cressets with good and sufficient light to the same, so on and so forth. I won't read them all, but this is basically just amplifying what Stowe had just said about, you know, how it works in practice. You have people accompanying the cresset bearers with the lights to top up the cressets when they run out, and they have straw hats, having their arms, in other words, the coat of arms of the company, on a piece of paper pinned on the hat. I haven't got a picture. I wish I had a picture of the straw hats. So that's the Midsummer Watch, which, as I say, was you may, if you looked into this, you may read books that claim that the Midsummer Watch is basically defunct by the end of the 1550s, because, and I'm not bragging here, nobody before me had looked at this material from this period, so nobody really knew that this actually, the Midsummer Watch carried on into the 1670s, 1570s rather. So it was, in fact, in this instance, the Queen was very keen, Elizabeth was very keen that this should happen, because it's fairly early in her reign, it's only 8 years since she's been Queen, and it's a show of strength as much as anything else. There were lots of musters in the 1560s as well, which basically, you know, livery companies and other organisations were basically commanded to congregate together somewhere notable like Smithfield or Blackheath with lots of arms and armour and so on. It's to show the country at large and those overseas that the country was ready to defend itself if needed to. There's always a political subtext to these things. Sometimes it's really overt, not often. Okay, so the Lord Mayor's Show. I love this map. My friend Rob Crichton, who runs a theatre company called Beyond Shakespeare, he drew this up. It shows you the route of the Lord Mayor's Show, which is quite different to that of the Midsummer Watch, so I'll just talk you through it. Excuse me, it starts at, it's not on the map, bizarrely, it starts at the Guildhall, which of course is the kind of town hall, the centre of the City of London, really. Oh, sorry, there it is. And they come down onto Cheapside, process down to the riverbank, a place called Three Cranes, which is still there, of course, which is where the Lord Mayor and his entourage get on the barges, the ceremonial barges, which are lavishly decorated, loads and loads of flags and streamers, musicians, and so on and so forth, would make quite an impression. And they go upriver to Westminster, where the Lord Mayor swears his oath of allegiance to the new monarch, in front of three of the Barons of the Exchequer, which are basically members of the Privy Council. And then at some point, sometimes they have a bit of a wait because of the tides, they come back to the city from Westminster, disembark usually at Paul's Stairs, so just below St Paul's Cathedral, and then process up. And then the main part of the day really starts then. So there are a number of staging posts, as you can see here, St Paul's itself, the Little Conduit, or the Pissing Conduit, which is near where St Paul's Tube is now, Cheapside Cross, the Standard, the Great Conduit on Cheap, and so on. And this route was kind of punctuated by stages, some of which were fixed, some of which were movable, and various little kind of, basically little playlets, little mini entertainments. Lots and lots of music, cannon going off from either side of the river, fireworks, noisy, probably quite dangerous. There's certainly seen evidence of people getting badly injured. In fact, somebody got killed by a cannon. Someone who was loading the cannon on Lambeth. His wife was given some compensation. So yeah, but it was a really big thing. It was really the biggest civic entertainment of the year by nothing really. And it was sought after commission as well. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. Okay, so what do we know about the shows? Well, we know quite a lot from the books. These pageant books started to be printed from 1585 onwards, and the one on the right of this slide is from 1585. It's very, very, very brief. It's just a couple of pieces of paper, really. Pretty basic. It doesn't have the author's name, the poet's name on it, but somebody has helpfully written by G. Peel on the front cover. You can see that, which is George Peel, who you may know as a playwright, Elizabethan playwright. And then working across from the left-hand side, you've got Thomas Decker's show from 1612, the last one of the pre-Civil War period that was printed, the 1639 one, which is by Thomas Hayward. And then in the middle, we've got my favourite, Thomas Middleton's show from 1623. You may recognise some of these names. I'm kind of hoping that you do. Carrying on, the one on the left here, 1624 show, John Webster, Anthony Munday, and then on the right-hand side, John Taylor, who's best known as a poet. He's the water poet, is usually known as. What I'm doing by showing you this, part to make the point that the shows are sometimes printed, is to emphasise that there was a very strong relationship between civic pageantry and the professional stage. These men were all active and very well known and very highly regarded as dramatists, stage dramatists, but they were also doing this work too. Middleton's case, a lot of it. Middleton was actually made the chronology of the City of London in 1621, which is basically the main man for commissioning entertainments and putting on shows for the city. He was very, very highly regarded, clearly. So there has been this notion, which I spent my whole career trying to destroy, but it's very persistent, that the City of London was opposed to theatre in all its forms, absolutely irrevocably opposed to it, which is utter nonsense, not least because you've got this happening, written by the same people as are writing plays being performed on Bankside or up in Shoreditch or whatever. Anyway, don't get me started on that, because I'm talking about that forever. Okay, the point's made. So these books were printed increasingly as the 17th century gets underway. Irritatingly, some occasions you know full well there was a book printed, but no copy survives. They survive in very, very small numbers. Monuments of Honour, the Webster one, there is one copy in the world, and it's the John Rylands in Manchester. Crisana Leather's about 6, but they are rare. Lots of conversation about why that might be the case. It's probably because they're like little kind of throwaway ephemeral pamphlets, really, and why would you necessarily want to keep them? You know, if you went to a theatre and you bought a programme, you might keep it. You probably wouldn't. You might keep it for a while and think, why am I keeping this? You know, that sort of thing. It's got that sort of dimension to it. So as I say, they don't survive in great numbers. And they're scattered around the world now because that's what happens to early printed books, unfortunately. I've seen most of them myself. However, what we do have when there's no book is copious amounts of contemporary documentation. So this is an extract from the Merchant Taylors again, 1568. This is their court minutes, where basically you see shows in the corner in the margin there on the left. I'm not asking you to read the writing. Basically, they're setting up to arrange the show for the Lord Mayor, who is one of their company. The way it works is the company that you're a member of takes the chief responsibility for putting on the show. So the members of the Merchant Taylors in this instance would have been assessed by their company for a certain amount of money, varying from usually something like £5 to 10 shillings, to contribute towards the cost of this. And you're talking about hundreds of members, so it's a lot of money. There's thousands of pounds being spent on these occasions. So this is pretty standard, really. It's a little bit of a transcription for you. Feast of Simon and St. Jude is the 29th of October, which is the traditional date of the Lord Mayor's show. It was moved to a Saturday in November because it was less important by the 19th century and it was kind of getting in the way of traffic and stuff. Shame, really. But traditionally, it was always the day after the Feast of St. Simon and St. Jude. So the company are basically arranging to make and devise streamers, flags, banners, targets, and other necessaries, lots and lots and lots of flaggy type things. to be held in readiness for to serve when the mayor should take his oath at Westminster. So they're getting the preparations underway. The same year, different book, but the same year, this is just one of those wonderful kind of happenstances, really. There is no printed book. There's no printed books, as I say, till 1585. But some absolute legend of a clerk decided to copy out the songs that were sung on the occasion of the 1658 mayoralty, 68 rather, into one of their books. I can't tell you how rare this is. There are 2 examples of this happening in the period I work on. This one and 1629, the Ironmongers Company. Generally speaking, the companies are not explicitly interested in things like songs and costuming and things like that. They're interested in things they're paying for. So you get an awful lot of detail. So they would have paid the poet to write these words, but what they were very, very unlikely to have done is to have written the words down themselves. So anyway, we have this, which is amazing. It's a very, very rare example of a kind of a mid-16th century pageantry. You'd be surprised to hear that the Lord Mayor's name was Roe. There's lots of wordplay, it's always the same. Sometimes it's easy, it's called Archer or something. Sometimes it's quite difficult. There was the Lord Mayor in 1605, who was a merchant tailor. His name was John Lehman. He was from French ancestry. And Anthony Munday, who did the show that year, he made a great play of the fact that it's about lemon. He had a whole device about lemons, Lehman lemon. And also, he kept describing Lehman as a bachelor. And Lehman actually means a lover. So it was just kind of like, cringe, really, absolutely cringe. But this one is really lovely. So it's all boys as well, they tell you it's boys. Behold the roe, the swift in chase, yet stayeth he'll to hear. As soon as John began to speak, the roe did yield his ear, the wild in word, yet mild to man, and listening to his sound, and chiefly as you now behold, when God thereafter is ground. Very da-da-da-da-da, but it works in the context of an open-air performance. Anything more complicated in terms of meter would not have come across very well. This is very good, really good and regular, clear. So we know they're boys. We know what the speeches were. And this is sorry, get back to this. The other thing about this, that because it's the merchant tailors, the speeches would have been performed, the boys would have been from the merchant tailors' school, who at this period in the 1560s were a very popular theatre troupe. They didn't just perform in these kind of events, they also performed in their own school for paying customers until things got a bit out of hand and it was kind of stopped. But the speeches are probably written by their school teacher, Mulcaster, probably. We don't know for sure, but the chances are. So they would have been very well rehearsed, these boys. They would have spent a lot of time in school declaiming, learning verse, learning how to deliver, learning the power of rhetoric and so on and so forth, because that's what humanist education was largely about. So they would have been good at it. Okay, so a little bit further on, 1602, we have no book for that one, but we have this amazing proliferation of information about streamers and coats of arms, lots and lots of coats of arms and streamers, and then later on, the actual pageant devices themselves. So this is all we know about 1602 show, is that there was, again, it was the school boys performing, 10 scholars which did represent the 9 muses and the god Apollo. So we know on Cheapside there was a device which staged the 9 muses and the god Apollo. That's all we do know, but it's better than nothing. In the absence of a book, we'd have known nothing else at all. So again, there's a little bit of information there. It's a case always of just kind of working through this material and just piecing things together. It's incredibly exciting when you find something. When I found a hobby horse, I was very, very excited. Only one, I've never found another one, but even one's better than none. So, okay, there's another one slightly later on. This is Haberdasher, Thomas Lowe. Again, the same procedure. They've been ordered to get things ready. Pageant chariot, a lion, 2 galleys, fireworks, banners, streamers, and other things. Again, no book. This is the occasion where they actually paid for a book to be printed, but there aren't any left, which is very annoying. But we know there was a chariot, which is quite common. We know there was a lion, and so on and so forth. So you can start getting a sense of what it was like. And this is the equivalent accounts for the Haberdasher show in 1604. This is particularly nice one because without this, we wouldn't know which dramatists were involved in this show. So you kind of work your way down, you've got mermaids, chariots, all sorts of exciting things. And then about 2/3 of the way down, you've got item paid to Anthony Munday for his pains, that's £2, that's the guy I wrote my first book about. And then item paid to Benjamin Johnson for his device and speech with the children, he got £12. So we know for sure that Johnson worked on the 1604 show for the haberdashers. That's the only information we have about it, unfortunately. But he did actually quite a lot of this kind of stuff. The same year he worked on the Royal Entry, which I'll come to in a bit. Also, tantalisingly, item paid for printing the book of the device, £1, 10 shillings, and I think there's probably about 250 copies. Nothing. They've all gone into the mists of time, sadly, but at least we've got the accounts. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to talk briefly about a couple of shows where we have got books. And I deliberately done it this way round because a lot of literary scholars tend to start and end with the books. That's all they're interested in. And because I work on the manuscripts, and I think actually manuscripts tell you a lot more, it's much, much more productive to put the two together, really. So in this instance, this is the 1620 mayoralty for Francis Jones, who was a haberdasher. The book was written by a man called John Squire, who was actually a cleric, which is very unusual. Francis Jones was a very interesting character. He, being Lord Mayor was incredibly expensive. You had to entertain all the time. And he basically overstretched himself. And the night before he was due to hand over to the next Lord Mayor, he scarpered, ran away, nobody knew where he went. So that was a bit embarrassing for the haberdashers. They're still embarrassed about it, even now. I did talk to them last year, and they were like, oh, God, Francis Jones, yeah, that doesn't happen very often. And they pretended he wasn't well, because he was supposed to be there for the new one to be inaugurated, and they were like, oh, he's not very well. Like, he's run away, you don't know where he is. So there he is. But this, I'm just showing you this because we've got some nice descriptions of the devices of the show, which really flesh out the accounts and so on that give you information about what was paid for. This gives you much more information about the actual dramatic quality of the show, what was being staged, how the performers were dressed, what characters were involved, and so on and so forth. You get the speeches as well more often than not too. So this is what they call the water show, and here you have Oceanus with his seahorses, which of course is completely appropriate to a water show. It's on the Thames. In the middle of the river, there would have been some sort of artificial island thing going on. So lots and lots of classical references there, lots of deities, muses and the like. There's lots of similarities between the shows, obviously. They are, however, sort of customized for the company and or the Lord Mayor himself as well. One of the jobs of the poet was to actually make it kind of directly relevant. And you'll see that, you'll see that in the second one. This is the land show, if you like. These are the pageant devices that were staged at various places in the city. And the fourth one, being the main pageant, was a mount, where on top of, under a canopy limned with stars, was seated Catherine, the saint of the company. So she's the patron saint of the haberdashers, Catherine, the one who was broken on the wheel, as you may know. And indeed, her wheel is there. She's wearing a snow white satin gown, and at her feet lay a broken wheel, and so on and so forth. And haberdashers have actually still got a gilt, probably gold actually, image of St. Catherine, which they had made in the 1650s, I think, which was carried around the streets during the show, and it's still there in their hall now. It's obviously been restored, but it's from the period, which is quite something. So you wouldn't have had St. Catherine in another company because they were, they're different patron saints. So the Merchant Tailors, for instance, it was St. John the Baptist. We also have some images from the period which are, again, rare and incredibly, incredibly important. These are two images from what's called the Fishmonger's Pageant scroll. It's not a scroll, but hey, it's from 1616, and these depict one of the devices from the water show on the left and one of the ones obviously from the land part of the procession on the right, and you can see the chains by which they would have been dragged around the streets. This is a boat called the Fishmonger's Esperanza, or the Hope of London, and this is the pageant of Richard II, and the royal kind of dignitaries with the king at the top, obviously, because it's all about priority and status and so on and so forth. And each instance for each of these devices, there were songs and speeches associated with them as well. These were drawn up probably in advance of the show, probably, I say probably, we don't really know, but probably to show the company what was being proposed. It's possible that this thing happened more often than not, or happened again, but nothing has survived apart from this one event. I'd like to think so. Or it might just have been that the haberdashers had a moment, the fishmongers had a moment in 1616 and said, we want some detailed drawings before we agree to anything. I don't know. These things always raise questions as well as give you answers. So, but it is wonderful to see the contemporary images of what they would have looked like. The one on the right, you can see there's a number of figures on there. There's 12. And they were probably drawn by horses, possibly by porters. 12 is usually the maximum number of figures you get on each individual device, and they would have been children. It would have been almost impossible to drag around a device with 12 adults on it. And also the children were best at doing the speeches and stuff, as I've already said, so they would definitely have been children. Possibly girls as well as boys, that's quite likely. So, okay, the other thing we have is music. I can't really, I can't emphasize enough how important music is to civic culture. It's everywhere. When the new master is sworn in for the company, he's accompanied by trumpets and drums and so on. Drums, fifes, and trumpets were the main instruments that were used for civic pageantry because, of course, it's noisy. They're noisy instruments. They kind of cut through a bit. But also the city waits of the city's kind of music troupe also were employed. And they used to perform on what were called the leads, in other words, on the kind of roof of St. Peter's Church on Cheapside, which must have been incredibly dangerous, actually. And that was every year, that was part of the procession. City Waits also performed for livery companies in their own halls when they had various entertainments on and so on and so forth. So music kind of punctuates a lot of the city's life, really. So this is 1613 show. There are two from the period which have got music in them. There's that one, and there's this one, which is 1620, which we saw earlier. And rather wonderfully, I have a friend who's an early music person, and she and her little troupe recorded this for us, and this is what I'm going to try and play for you. Hopefully it will work. Working earlier. It's probably the first time that's been played for an audience since 1613. So special, isn't it? Tamsin did this to me a long time ago, but I never got around to using it before, so it's really special. I have also got a recording of the 1621, but this is special. A couple of things about that. I mean, as you tell from the voice, it was almost undoubtedly sung by a boy chorister. It wouldn't have been sung by an adult woman, that's for sure. And the words are specific to the occasion. So they would know, there's a reference here to a man in robes and this kind of thing. So it's about the Lord Mayor. Who wrote it, we do not know, unfortunately. But again, it's a rare survival. And I just asked her, well, years ago now, and I said, well, there's this music. And she said, oh, all right. I said, would you be able to do it? And she said, yeah, of course. So they just did that. It's amazing, amazing. So yeah, this is the words of the song from the printed book on the left-hand side, and that's the notation on the right. So it works very well. And again, to say 20 show is also music, and again, exactly the same thing. It's about the new Lord Mayor, you know, it's the same sentiments, excuse me, as the rest of the show would have had, obviously, welcoming him. Also, sometimes kind of saying, you know, your predecessors are kind of famous and august and have done wonderful things, and we expect you to be just as good as them. So it's kind of often this kind of slight admonition thing going on. It's kind of interesting, really. It's not always just like, rah, rah, of the Lord Mayor. It's sometimes, be a good boy. Of course, in the case of Francis Jones, he wasn't. So there you go. Okay, a couple more things about the shows that don't come out of the books, printed books, or often from the manuscripts, and that's eyewitness accounts. So what was it like to see this thing? Henry Mackin, who was a merchant tailor, was active in London in the middle of the 16th century, and he left this amazing diary. It's really fascinating. It's really, you can get it online, just search for it. And 29th day of October, the new mayor took his barge toward Westminster. His spelling is hilarious. My new Lord Mayor, Master Harper, with the aldermen in their scarlet and all the crafts of London in their livery, which is the livery companies, obviously, and their barges with their banners and streamers of every occupation's arms. And there was a goodly foist made mad with streamers, targets and banners and arms, and great shooting of guns and trumpets blowing. And at 12 of the clock, my Lord Mayor and the aldermen landed at Paul's Wharf, and so to Paul's churchyard, and there met him a pageant gorgeously made, mad is good though, with children, with diverse instruments playing and singing, an afternoon to Paul's with trumpets, and there were something men with blue gowns and capes and hose and blue satin sleeves and targets and shields of arms. It's a bit of a rush, you know, it's just all this impression, but it's just wonderful. Not least because the way he writes somehow mimics the pageant, the procession. You know, it's like one thing, and then came this, and then came that, and then came the other thing. And he's really struck, when he was a Londoner himself, so he knew all about this kind of stuff. You know, the colour, again, the silk would have looked amazing. They had them all specially painted with coats of arms and various other things for the occasion, music and so on. And, you know, it would have been overwhelming kind of experience, really. There are actually more eyewitness accounts of the Lord Mayor's show than there are of the stage plays being performed at the same time in London, actually. And I could talk about them endlessly, but I've not got time, so I won't. But it's very well recorded by sort of first-hand witnesses, which is fantastic stuff, really. Especially if they're foreign, they don't really understand what's going on. That's really funny. They're like, I think there was a nymph. I mean, he knows because he's part of the city himself. Okay, other things you get, little kind of bits and bobs with the incidental stuff, which always makes me smile. So, for instance, the haberdashers, 1604, they hired 100 javelins from the Tower for the procession, for people to carry. Lost one, had to reimburse it. Gave the lieutenant of the Tower a sugar loaf for his help, which is quite an expensive present, actually. Then they've got Dodd. I love it when the names come. You sometimes do get the names, it's wonderful. Dodd was the Lord Mayor's officer. And basically he has been charged to arrest the members of the haberdashers who haven't paid their assessments towards the show. Farmer, the sergeant, in other words, the sergeant of the jails, was also involved. So this is the kind of legalistic, you know, people have been naughty stuff. Thing I'm particularly fond of, item paid to one that went on stilts to make room. That's as yet the only reference I've seen to stilts, but I love it. I love the fact there were stilts. One person on stilts. They had sword fighters as well. They had all sorts of amazing things. And then you've got the guns. Fawcett is being paid for his pains in overseeing the chambers, which is the cannon. An item given more of benevolence to them and towards them for carrying away a poor man that was hurt in that service. I know. There was one wonderful moment in the Drapers' Company accounts where a small boy is being given sixpence because he was supposed to be a drummer but was disappointed. It's just lovely. And someone lost their hat, and just, it's about people, you know, these are people doing things that are fun, you know, and the kind of the peopleness of it, like the humanity of it really comes to you, especially when you're reading manuscripts, which of course, you know, are human documents. So we've got the green men, which I think I've mentioned already, and this is what the green men are there for. Obviously, you know, the Green Man is kind of a famous sort of figure in mythology, goes back many hundreds of years. But in this instance, they're being used as crowd control. So what he's got in his hands there is a kind of a firework, effectively, which is used to kind of make people stand back. There's a lot of concern to make sure that people were not intruding on the route. Nobody was misbehaving, although people did misbehave a lot. So crowd control and sort of making sure everything was orderly was a very, very big preoccupation. This is just giving an example of the flags and banners and so on that are absolutely ubiquitous in these documents. This is from the Fishmonger's Roll again, from 1616, coats of arms of the company, the City of London and the new Lord Mayor. Sometimes things didn't go according to plan, you know? Sometimes people are dying of the plague and it's not considered appropriate to hold a great big entertainment and have everyone out congregating around. So the companies were told to stop feasting, and also in this instance, the grievous visitation, they decided they were not going to have the full-on Lord Mayor's show entertainment. The Lord Mayor did not go to Westminster to take his oath. He would have gone to the Tower of London just down the road. None of the usual stuff, no barge, no entertainments, no music, none of that. This is a serious, sad time. This was 1603, which of course was the year Elizabeth died and the year that James came to the throne, and James's royal entry was postponed by a year because 1603 was, proportionate to the population of the city, probably the worst outbreak of plague in the whole period. And I'm including 1665 in that. We only know so much about that one because of Pepys, but actually this one was worse. Funnily enough, well, not funnily, but by a strange coincidence, 1625, when James died and Charles took over, another very, very bad plague year. And James's royal entry never took place because he wasn't bothered, actually. James's did, and you'll see in a second what that was like. But yeah, just a salutary reminder, really, you know, that these are human beings and horrible things happen as well as good things. Okay, I'll just finish off a couple of things about the royal entry, which, as I say, is often for the coronation, but not always. This is my company, so I had to include this one. Our records are not exactly copious, but even so, we have got some. This is 1558 to 1559, so it's the accession of Elizabeth I, obviously, and the company are here paying out for, guess what, flags and so on, but also for what are called rails, for them to stand against, rather, when the Queen is processing through the city towards the cathedral. They are being told they have to turn out in their best attire, you know, basically make a good show, make the whole city look really amazing. Here's a couple of images from James's royal entry, which was, as I say, 1604 rather than 03. This is one of the printed books that came out of that. This one's by Decker. Ben Jonson wrote a lot of the speeches, and one speech for a character called Zeal was actually written by Thomas Middleton. That's his first time he did anything for civic pageantry, which he carried on doing until 1626. So he made a career out of it, really. But I love the way Decker writes. And behold, afar off they spy him, the king, richly mounted on a white jennet under a rich canopy, sustained by 8 barons of the Cinque Ports, the tower serving that morning but for his withdrawing chamber, wherein he made him ready, and from thence stepped presently into his city of London, which at the time might worthily borrow the name of his court royal. The passage along that court offering itself for more state through 7 gates, of which the first was erected at Fernchurch, which is this one. So the route basically starts at the Tower. The Tower, remember, is not part of the city. The Tower is a royal palace and a royal property, so it's technically outside the city, even though it's kind of surrounded by the city. So they process from the Tower along Mark Lane, which is a really narrow little road, still is, onto Fenchurch Street, which is, relatively speaking, quite a big road, and the first arch they came across was the Londinium Arch, which is that one. So what James is doing, both kind of sort of physically and metaphorically entering into Londinium. So that's what I said earlier about there being lots of sort of significance in the route and in the stages of the route as well. And they went from Fenchurch Street down, turn left up Gracious Street. There would have been another arch near Leadenhall. Then they turned down Cornhill, another one at the bottom of Cornhill, then down to Cheapside where there were 2. Then there was one by St Paul's. Then there was one down just outside of Fleet Bridge, and then there was one at Temple Bar, and then you're in Westminster. So there were 7 in the city. And this image here is an engraving which was done by a man called Stephen Harrison, who published this incredible, massive, great big folio of the arches, images of the arches, this massive book. It's beautiful, it's amazing. this is a different kind of level to the expenditure and the splendour of the Lord Mayor's show. You know, this is a new king. You've got to push out, you've really got to push the boat out, this one. So they had, you know, engraving carvings. This is basically, it's wood painted and designed to look like stone. They were put up and taken down quite quickly. But you've got London itself represented at the top there. One of the arches, the one that Podham Cornhill, was put together by the Dutch community, or the Belgians, as they were called, who lived in London at that time. And it's got a very different kind of messages for the king. It's mostly saying, we are incredibly important to the economy of London. We want you to look after us, please, like Elizabeth did. Interesting stuff, yeah. So there's lots of that going on, as you can expect. But yeah, it was the most amazing spectacle, really. But James himself doesn't appear to have enjoyed it very much. Decker, he's just hilarious. He just says it as it is, really. They had, by Poultry, the little church is Mildred Poultry, which is top end of Cheapside Poultry area, if you know London at all. They had a stage set up with some musicians playing a Danish march in honour of Queen Anna, who was, as you know, Danish. And Decker talks about this, and it was really amazing. I don't know what Danish march is, actually, but they're playing this Danish march. He says, and by then, the king was so excited, he basically gives us some balls by then. So a couple of times he says that, and the king is clearly like, oh, God, can we just get on with it? He's rushing ahead the whole time. He doesn't seem to be really paying much attention to it. Elizabeth was quite different. She would stop and sort of listen and talk to people and stuff. She was very about all that kind of stuff. James, not so much. But it was a real spectacle. And then we've got, as I say, there was a gap. There was nothing for Charles I. Never a great friend of the city anyway, as I'm sure you know. And then we've got the coronation entry for Charles II. The one on the right, I think, is in some ways more enlightening because it gives you a sense of the sheer number of people processing and the fact that they are ordered by rank of seniority and obviously status. The king himself is in the bottom right-hand corner, left-hand corner even. He's very tall, and you can kind of see he's very tall. This rather spectral image on the top is kind of, it's sort of mythical stage. It's like London, but it's not really, could be anywhere really. But yeah, this follows the same pattern. And here we have, just to finish off, a couple of images I mentioned from slightly later in the period. Here's the merchant tailors being told to extend the size of their standings, their railings that were set up for them to stand in, so they made a good show for the passage of the king through the city. And here we have Decker talking about the same thing. A goodly and civil order was observed in marshalling all the companies according to their degrees, the first beginning at the upper end of St Mark's Lane, which is the start of the procession, and the last above the conduit in Fleet Street, which is pretty much the end of the city stage of the procession. Their seats being double-railed upon the upper part where they lean, the streamers, ensigns, and bannerets of each particular company decently fixed. Again, there's a kind of status thing. The Mercer's company would definitely have been first, because they're the number one company of the Great 12. And it would have been the 12, and then there would have been everyone else following along. And this is what it looked like. This is a kind of, I've seen this image so many times, and a few years ago, I just looked more closely at it, and I realized I can see standings. So you can see where these individuals are. The far side of the procession with the horses and so on. They are standing in the standings, covered in blue cloth, with the banners and flags, exactly as the livery companies are instructed to do for every one of these occasions. And the bigger copy of the image at the top there shows you Cheapside in the 17th century before the fire, which is the most wonderful thing. And the building on the right with the sign is actually a very well-known tavern. Then you've got the Cheapside Cross in the middle, which one of the Eleanor crosses, as you probably know, Goldsmiths Road, the other side of the street, and the Standard just behind with Fame on top, just behind the cross. Slightly exaggerated how wide Cheapside is, but it is big street. It still is the widest street in the city. But this was always the epicenter of all these entertainments. No matter it was a royal entry, Lord Mayor's show, Midsummer Watch, Cheapside was where it all really, really happened. So I think that's probably it. I've slightly overrun, sorry. I've got through 40 slides in 45 minutes, so it's not very good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. A wonderful preambulation through the City of London in the Renaissance period. I should note that actually Tracey does do periodically walks around the City of London, as you probably got. She has this almost London taxi cab knowledge, of ability about which way processions went and so on. So should you want to...
highly recommend walking around.
The city, yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating, it really is.
Any questions? Okay, I have a question here.
I was fascinated to see that you mentioned the haberdashers.
Yep.
What is the etymology of haberdasher?
Oh my word.
The etymology of haberdasher.
I'm not sure.
Shall I check OED at the back?
You could do that. I could ask the archivist. I could give him a ring. You know, I'm not sure. They're a combination of different smaller companies, which is quite common. So in the sort of 15th, 16th century, they joined up with the Hatters Company. So I'm assuming it's some sort of portmanteau word which reflects the diversity of trades within haberdashers. But they were mostly making kind of fine goods, very kind of luxurious goods, really, and also hats. The Hatters are kind of quite subservient to the bulk of the company, really. But yeah, so no one's ever asked me that before. So thank you.
I'm thinking of Decker's play, The Shoemaker's Holiday. I'm wondering if that's the right point of reference for this. Because if I'm remembering it correctly, at the end it's about how one of the guild holidays gets established, kind of almost mythical history of it, but it leaves you with the impression that they were, one, very proud of this right to put on a festival of this, but on the other hand, I'm sure there was a lot of pageantry, but I don't suppose everybody just went home quietly at the end of it. It sounds like there was quite a lot of eating and drinking going on as well. I
think the city jails were probably quite busy. I mean, yeah, Decker's play, for those of you who don't know, which is a great play, really good. It's about a man called Simon Eyre, who founded the Leadenhall in the 15th century. He was originally a cordwainer, head shoemaker, and he had to translate to the Drapers' Company to become Lord Mayor. So Decker plays a bit fast and loose with the history, but yeah, that's who he is. Yeah, it definitely. I mean, Decker is, you know, quite, as a lot of his contemporaries were, quite very interested in the city and how it works and the kind of dynamism of it and so on.
Can I just add that I have looked up, this is what happens when you have two professors in the room. I've looked up haberdasher and of uncertain origin.
Ah, there you go. Fantastic.
Perhaps borrowing from French.
I feel completely vindicated.
So, question at the front, and then we'll go to one at the back.
You haven't mentioned the freedom of the City of London. I was wondering when that originated and whether there was a procession and whether people who were given the freedom were part of any of this, or
they would all had to be free of the city. You had to be free of the city to work. You had to be a freeman of the city to work in the city. Yeah. So we'll go back to the very first one. Yeah. Basically, you started your apprenticeship if you followed that route at 14 years old, and you were apprenticed for 7 years. And 21, you, provided you did everything correctly, you became a member of that company and simultaneously freeman of the city. So the two things went hand in hand. That's what I'm talking about. It's been going for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Because, well, yeah, okay. I mean, I've got it. Yeah. We both would have got it through what's called redemption. So basically, you know, we didn't go through apprenticeship. Was your father free of the city? No, okay, it was redemption then. The patrimony is where your father, or I think nowadays mother as well, so you kind of inherit it. In this period, the most common route by a long, long way was apprenticeship, then patrimony, and then redemption was really unusual. And it was normally because somebody very powerful lent on the company and said, I want you to give membership of your company, i.e. Freedom City, to my servant or something like that. You see these letters sometimes. So what happens to us now is it's the same thing, but it doesn't have anything like the same significance. I mean, this sheep thing is all a bit of nonsense as well, so yeah.
I'm a Freeman of the nurses,
Are you?
and they're 111 in the hierarchy.
right.
But we can only join the Worshipful Company of Nurses if you've actually been on the state registration or
Right.
you're registered nurse. But we're so young, there's no patrimony or anything involved. We've only been a company for 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Don't know, just
One of the
thought you might
youngest,
like-
yeah, amazing. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the companies, because things have changed, don't have an awful lot to do with the trade that they were set up to look after. I mean, I'm a founder, and it just happens our outgoing master actually did run a bell foundry, the bell foundry in Whitechapel, but that is really unusual. Mostly they're just busy city people, really. So yeah, that's an example of a very, very focused trade-based company, which is in a way more like it was then, which is interesting. Congratulations, great.
Hi, I'm curious to know how many of those arches, those magnificent arches, still survive.
None.
If you say there were 7, I can't
Yeah, none.
think of any of them.
They were put up briefly. They were only put up for a couple of days. Oh, really? Oh, I see. All that work for a couple of days. Yep. One of the city gates survives, which is Temple Bar, which is now near St Paul's, because as you probably know, it was originally Fleet Street, and it was at Tibbles, wasn't it, for a long, long time, decades, long time, hundreds of years, I think, and then it was brought back into the city about 10, 15 years ago, I think, but it's not in the right place, but at least it's one of them. But yeah, no, they were wood, very heavily designed and decorated wood, but they were put up and taken down in the course of a day or two, really. You do see sometimes you see the companies are paying for people to guard them overnight. So people, because wood's kind of quite a pricey thing, someone taking off half the arch overnight. But yeah, with Charles, they were partly put up before the whole thing was called off, and then just taken down.
The nearest equivalent is something like the Olympic opening ceremonies.
Yeah,
If you think about the amount of effort for one night or one day. Question here.
Yes, I'm aware that the vast majority of ordinary people were pretty illiterate, but is there any extant evidence about what ordinary people made of all this sort of pomp and pageantry?
Literacy rates in London were much higher than they were elsewhere in the country. It's a hard thing to actually kind of know for sure, but the general supposition is that literacy rates for men in London was probably about 25–30%, which is pretty high, and for women wasn't an awful lot less. Elsewhere in the country it would have been lower. It wasn't mandatory to be literate to be a member of a company and to work in the city, but it kind of helped, actually. Mackin was just a pretty normal guy, he had no particular status. He was just interested in this stuff. He was fascinated by funerals, absolutely obsessed with funerals. But I'm glad he was, because he's left us this amazing diary.
Could I ask a question about the fact that this always took place at the end of October, which is famously not a predictable time of year as far as the weather was concerned, and all of this took place outside, some of it took place on the river. Is there any evidence of what happened when the weather was not terribly kind?
They usually soldiered on. One year it was so bad, they had to call a halt to it and do it again on the 5th of November, actually. And that was 1605. And that was the fishmongers. No, not fishmongers. Yes, it was. And they spent quite a lot of money buying coals to dry all the costumes and things out. It must have been really bad for them to stop it, actually, because I'd imagine every year there were issues with the weather. But that was the feast day, that's when it was. It was the day after St Jude. They weren't going to change that, and that's what it happened to be, end of October. So,
And as we saw in Paris, the Olympic ceremony doesn't stop for much either.
True.
So,
yeah, I mean, the other thing that I think is sometimes quite difficult for us to remember is that people's lives were structured around these feast days and these kind of dates in the calendar, even after the Reformation. To a large extent, like Michaelmas at the end of September is Still, when the Lord Mayor is elected in London, and also happens to be when new master of my company is sworn in, quite a lot of companies have that day, don't they? So those things still happen. And then, of course, you've got, New Year, Lady Day, 25th of March. You may be aware that was New Year's Day until the 18th century. So when James processed through the city in 1604, it was the 15th of March, but it's the 15th of March 1603, because 1604 started on the 25th of March. That used to blow my students' minds. I showed them the documents, and they go, no, working through these documents, going, okay, so yeah, December 1620, January 1620, February 1620, what's going on? So I explain, then suddenly April, when it was 1621. There's a gravestone, actually, in, this is my local knowledge thing, in a little church, St Bartholomew the Less, which is inside St Bart's Hospital. You know it? Well, of course you know it, of course you know it. It's always open, because it's a chapel of ease, so it's always open. It's the most wonderful little church. Part of it is medieval, and the rest of it is 18th century, because it was partly rebuilt. But if you go inside the main door, just on the left-hand side, there's a gravestone which has got 2 dates on it, because these people died in the 1750s, while the calendar was being changed. So it's got 1750/1751, because they both died in January, I think it was. It's kind of cool, yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, there we go.
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick one. Can you explain what the function of the Lord Mayor was back in the 16th, 17th century?
He basically was the head of the city, the top official of the City of London.
So would have been responsible for managing the affairs of? Okay.
Yeah, he was the monarch's deputy. He was actually the only commoner who was allowed to stand in for the monarch if for whatever reason the monarch was dead or incapacitated and there was no successor. I mean, I don't think it ever happened, but he was the only one who was allowed to do that. The role now is pretty much nominal, really. There's obviously quite a lot of pageantry involved in it, and still quite a lot of dining and wining and so on. But it's about city now. It's about basically being a representative for the financial services industry. But back in the day, the Lord Mayor had extensive powers. And governed the Court of Aldermen, who basically, they basically instructed people what to do all the time, and they were the conduit as well for directions from the Privy Council and the monarch too. So if the Privy Council or the King or Queen wanted something to happen in London, they would go through the Lord Mayor and the Court of Aldermen, and they in turn would send precepts and other communications to the companies. Yeah, it was, really, really important. And that's just the City of London, obviously, not what we think of as London now.
And the mayor, although elected every year, was elected from the body of aldermen, all of whom were elected, inverted commas, for life. So you did get some repeat Lord Mayors. But it was expensive.
It was very unusual in this period. I mean, you had a couple who were sort of drafted in, having done it before, if the existing Lord Mayor had died or something, then they kind of bring somebody in, like Richard Martin, I think, had 3 goes at it. But more often than not, Whittington, obviously, it's very unusual, having been Lord Mayor many times. Very, very unusual. We've got a female Lord Mayor at the moment. She just got recently, a couple of weeks ago. Second time, I remember.
If I want to understand something, I try to follow the money. And in this case, I don't understand the money, because a lot of the money is being spent, but for what purpose?
To demonstrate the city's prestige, its wealth, its influence, sometimes to act as a kind of tacit reminder to the monarch that the city's got its own independence. They treasured the fact they could elect their own leaders. This was very important to them. That's the one thing King John did that City of London thinks is a good thing, was give them the right to elect their own leaders. So yeah, it's about not embarrassing the city. I mean, the City of London then as now is of course largely about money, about economics and about trade and so on and so forth. But these people took this stuff very, very seriously. It's very important to them to put on a good show. Very important.
But where are the new owners coming from? Because Alderton is
I don't think they would have seen it like that. I don't think they did at all. No, I mean, they do. The companies also have quite a strong sort of philanthropic dimension to them as well. They spend quite a lot of money supporting their members, also, you know, punishing their members as well. So you get a bit of both, but they're unusual entities. You know, they're not just about finance. They're also about brotherhood and fraternity and mutual support and hospitality as well. You know, I'm a member of a company myself, so are you. You know, and obviously, you know, we don't do the trade stuff anymore, but we still do an awful lot of feasting. Yeah, and we support students, and you know, we've got the Armed Forces thing, which I've got mixed feelings about, but hey, it's a big thing in the city. The Armed Forces Covenant. There's, you know, it's kind of intertwined with charitable stuff, and you know, they're really interesting organisations. What they're trying to do, and have been trying to do for quite a long time now, is keep relevant by doing stuff, even if there's no longer any boundaries very much. They're still relevant. They're still doing things. They're still contributing. So yeah, that's kind of how it works now. It's a very strange world, but I love it. And you know, I got the Freedom of the City 2017. You were there, weren't you? And because I work in this period, it's like, that's not right. I have to be a member of a company, because that's wrong. And so I ended up being a founder anyway. And I sit in the Guildhall Library and I'm reading these documents about feasts and so on, knowing that that evening I'm going to Founders Hall in Smithfield for a feast. It's just incredible. That continuity is just amazing, really. You know, and to an extent, the same kinds of practices and the same sort of roles within the companies, the same processes for electing people and swearing in and ceremonies and this and that and the other. There's extraordinary continuity.